in person. I could thank our greeter and the people who provided refreshments and so forth. We might even have read the minutes and listened to the treasurer's report. Who knows? For now, let's be thankful we can meet safely and as informatively as we can using Zoom, learning about our town's history. Carol, why don't you start our Zoom recording now? Good afternoon. I'm Tom Kinzer, President of the Bedford Historical Society, and I now declare this Zoom meeting of the Society open. I'd like to thank Carol Amick for hosting this Zoom meeting. I'd like to thank our Executive Director, Christine Moore, for her work on social media, including our website, our Facebook page, and our Twitter account, work which has expanded our accessibility and our audience, including perhaps some of you who have signed up with us for this meeting. Whether this is your first Bedford Historical Society meeting or your 50th, welcome. If you're a newcomer, we'd love to have you join our society. I'd also like to thank Katie Duvall and Alex Soderberg and Bedford TV for streaming and recording this meeting. And I'd like to thank our Vice President, David Spencer, for his recent contribution of Ethernet networking equipment, along with his expertise, and an updated telephone to help improve the functionality of our office. Finally, and most importantly of all, I'd like to thank you, our members and guests today. You, your participation and your interest make our society's efforts meaningful. The major feature of this February 28th, 2021 meeting is a presentation by this afternoon's speaker, Bedford's town historian, Sharon Lawrence McDonald. Sharon is well known around town, partly because she served as the children's librarian at the Bedford Free Public Library for some 40 years. Sharon is a member of the board of directors of the Bedford Historical Society and a volunteer archivist for the Society's collection. She is also president of the Friends of the Job Lane House and the volunteer curator of its museum. She's the author of several books about Bedford, including The Bedford Flag Unfurled, published in 2000, which was inspired by displaying the flag to our Bedford Library's visitors. The book was the fruit of 20 years of work about the flag, both here and in England. In 2017, she published A Meeting House and Its People, the story of the first parish in Bedford. Her latest book, published in 2020, is Bedford's History for Kids. And don't let the title fool you. Yes, it is a book for kids, but it's also a book for all of us looking for a concise and delightful account of our town. Today she's speaking to us about a cast of historic characters. The cast will be 4 in number, and Sharon has requested that we entertain questions out after each of the 4 segments. So we will certainly do it that way. Sharon, it's yours.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm hearing an echo. Are you hearing an echo?
The echo, Sharon, is probably due to your husband being in the same room.
Oh, I'm hearing an echo because you're sitting there.
A mute.
Now he's muted. How about that?
Okay.
Okay, but I see him, not me.
No, you're on the full screen. Go ahead.
Oh, lovely. Oh, lovely. Well, Tom was so kind to introduce me. And I really, I want to say I have another credential for doing this program. And that is that I just love Bedford. When I was young, I moved around from place to place. I never really had a home. When I came to Bedford, I thought, oh, for the job, a couple of years. And here I am 43 years later, I found a place to put down my roots and I love it. I just love it. So that's another credential for my being town historian. Well, let me tell you that in 1771, Bedford had been without a minister for 6 years. And this was a problem because everyone in town was required by Massachusetts Bay Colony law to attend church every week. And if they didn't, they could be fined, or if they were a habitual offender, they could be put in the stocks. So the tithing man would go around from house to house. You know, the tithing man, he was elected by the town. He had a pole that had a ball on one end, a silver ball, and on the other hand, maybe a feather, probably a rabbit's tail. And he would go about the church, and if you were asleep, he would bonk you on the head, or maybe he would tickle your nose with the rabbit's tail, but you weren't allowed to sleep in church. His job was also to go around to people's houses who hadn't been to church and enforce the rule that they better get on the stick and go to church or get ready for the stocks. So that was the tithing man's problem, was that from week to week, the church was being preached to by supply ministers for 6 years, and they really needed their own minister. So, let me tell you, there was no choice of going to another church that did have a minister, because Bedford had only one church, and that was the church on the common. You had no choice. You went to the Church of Christ in Bedford, and that was it. You can appreciate what a relief it was when Joseph Pennaman was called as minister. He was from Braintree. He just finished Harvard, and he answered the call. 6 ministers had already turned Bedford down. I don't know why, but Pennaman was willing to come over, and he negotiated for his salary. It was an annual 66 pounds, 33 shillings and 4 pence, and also all of his firewood. Now, no matter how happy the people were, there was to be no public celebration on his ordination day. He was to have no, this is a quote from the church, no levity, no profaneness, no music, no dancing, no frolicking, and other disorders. Well, this is difficult for Mr. Pennaman because at heart, he was a frolicker. He is not remembered for his sermons. He's remembered for his quirkiness. Whenever I looked him up in A.E. Brown, which is the history of Bedford, or in Shattuck, which is the history of Concord, or even in the history of Harvard by Norse, he retired to Harvard, so he gets a few paragraphs in Harvard. They always quote the same prayer. It had been a dry season, and finally Mr. Pennaman called the people together and offered a prayer. The Lord, vouchsafe that thou wilt uncork the bottles of heaven and let the soothing rain fall down upon the parched fields. But the rain started, rained, didn't stop. So after a while, he offered another prayer. Lord, we ask that you unstop the bottles of heaven, but not that thou wouldst leave them unstopped. And then after it continued to rain, he offered a last prayer. Lord, we ask that thou wouldst let the cooling waters come, but we didn't ask that you would throw away the stoppers. Let me see what else I have to tell you. Oh dear. Pennaman also liked his drink. Now, I believe the drink of choice was rum. Some people think, oh, they're out in the pub and they're drinking beer. They weren't drinking beer. That's what you drank at home. When you went out, you drank rum. So at Timothy Jones's house, he was having a house raising for the addition that was his ballroom. Timothy Jones's house is where Ann Siemens used to live. Now, he had a great party. All the people in Bedford came over. Pennaman lifted a few more, and by the time he was ready to go home, he was a little juiced. And riding home, he fell off his horse and lost his wig. So I looked around for his wig for a bit, but he really needed to go home. So he went home without his wig. And the little boys found his wig. And a couple of days later, went to his house and stuffed it in a hollow log. And then went up and knocked on the door. Reverend Pennaman, would you come help us get a woodchuck out of this log? And Pennaman came down and looked in the log, and there was his wig. Not dignified. Pennaman was in the church, in the ministry during the years of the American Revolution. And in the early hours on April 19th, 1775, the alarm riders came through town and would have awoken Mr. Pennaman and his wife and children. He lived just off North Road, where Carlisle Road comes in behind Doyen's. Richard Leshack, are you on? It's right down by Richard Leshack's house. So he can have us over after. Now let me see. He lived so close, really, to the Fitch Tavern where the Minutemen were gathering that he almost could overhear Captain Wilson saying, "It's a cold breakfast, boys, but we'll give the British a hot dinner. We'll have every dog of them before night." And the Minutemen and the militia marched over to Concord, and Mr. Pennaman didn't march with them. There were ministers who came through from other towns on their way to Concord and reported that Mr. Pennaman was at home. And A.E. Brown, you know, A.E. Brown, who's the author of The History of Bedford, who's writing in 1892, said that he was ensconced in his armchair beside his fire. And then in another place, A.E. Brown said he was a kind of a Tory. But in somewhere, a minister from Reading reported that he'd gone to Pennaman's house, and Pennaman had said, "Go fight. I will be here on my knees where I belong." I like that. Don't you like that? Now, Pennaman was there. You know the story of the day when Jonathan Wilson, the captain of the Minutemen, was killed at the Bloody Angles and was brought home up to his house on Old Billrica Road. And Pennaman said a prayer at the funeral and said, "Lord, we pray thee to send the British soldiers where they will do so good, because we have no use for them about here." How's that for a funeral prayer? That quirky. quirky. As I said, Pennaman retired to Harvard, Mass, but it wasn't your usual retirement. He was terminated. He was fired. He was not a hasty decision. He'd been minister for 22 years, but something happened on a communion day that grieved his people. And they called together a council of ministers who deliberated for a couple of days and recommended that they terminate their agreement with Mr. Pennaman. So he retired to Harvard, Mass, and was occasionally called upon to advise the minister or preach in that church. But at the Bedford church, some wag pinned a paper on the church that said, "A wicked priest, a crooked people, a cracked bell without a steeple." Quirky. Now that's the story of Joseph Pennaman. Have you questions about this character? No? Oh, I thought you would so I could blow my nose.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. He retired to Harvard. Why Harvard? Do we know what
Don't
sent
know.
him in that direction?
I don't know. He was from Braintree. His wife was from Plymouth, so it wasn't they were going back home. The minister in Harvard was William Emerson, who was Ralph Waldo Emerson's father, but he wouldn't have been famous at that point. I don't know. I don't know.
Good enough. Thank you.
Sharon, you mentioned that people were fined for not attending church back then. Any idea what the fine was?
It was several shillings, 5 shillings, which was a much more than 5 shillings is today, but it was 5 shillings about.
And the other question I have is that you mentioned that Bedford went for 6 years without a minister. When these other ministers would come, were they interviewed, or if anybody who was a minister wanted to come, were they allowed to come and be the Bedford minister? Was there any kind of review of the people?
Yes, there was a review. They had to be interviewed by the church. They had to be interviewed by the town. The church would recommend and the town would confirm. It was a call. It was a call by the church, not a hiring, although he did get paid. And I don't know, probably he could put his name in the pot, but it was usually the church, I believe, that asked the minister to come and preach. And they kind of heard him at first and then decided whether they wanted to go further.
Carol, I see some questions in chat. Maybe you want to read them?
I see no chat questions. Oh,
Oh,
wait a
I
minute.
do.
Nick Rose.
I do.
If you
What
can read-
about poor Mrs. Pennaman? Yes, what about poor Mrs. Pennaman? She gets lost in the shuffle. A.E. Brown doesn't say a thing about her. And he's the one that I refer to. I have his book by my chair in the living room, that A.E. Brown. Fussed around with, Ina Manser's A New England Church, and she doesn't mention anything. And there's a wonderful book called A Meeting House for the People, and she doesn't say anything about Mrs. Pennaman. It's unknown. It's unknown. And from Rick Rosen to everyone, do we know what Pennaman's offense was? I would love to know what in the world he did to grieve his people. I've read in the town records that he grieved his people on a communion day, and whether that was another inappropriate joke, whether he'd had a little too much to drink again, or what in the world it was, nobody knows. A.E. Brown thought it was too much drinking. Norse in Harvard said it wasn't too much drinking. He didn't drink when he came to Harvard. So I don't know. Lee Vorderer. Did Reverend Pennaman's house come along with his position at the church? If so, then he didn't have to leave town, or at least his house, when he was fired. Well, that's true. At first, he lived down at the old Pollard Tavern down by Richard Leshak's house. And then about 8 years before he was dismissed, he built a beautiful house on the Great Road, which we call the Pennaman Stearns house. You think of the Stearns, that's where Samuel Stearns lived, but Pennaman built it. It's the very fancy house next to the Fitch Tavern. It's got lilacs in front of it, so it's hard to see now, but it's kind of Bedford yellow, golden color. That's where he lived. And Bedford said to him, the town meeting said to him, "We will abate your taxes if you will stay." That was custom for a minister to have his taxes abated. "We will continue to abate your taxes if you'll stay." But Pennaman said no. Nope. Let me see. Another book, it might not mention Mrs. Pennaman, worth a try, is Sibley's Harvard Graduates. The class of 1765 is in volume 16. All right. All right. Can you jump up and check?
Sharon, I don't have the book. I don't have that volume here at home, but I just threw it out as a source.
Excellent, excellent. I'll look in that and see if I can add to my
Fascinating
knowledge of Mrs. Pennaman. Doris, were you going to say something?
You already answered the question. Thanks. I was wondering what his offense was.
Would love to know. Well, that's all I see. Anybody like to hear? Maybe he said something heretical. I think that is very possible, that it was his theology, not his drinking, that was the problem. You ready for another one? All right. This is, see, I have color-coded cards, index cards, so that I can find what I want. Let me see. When you do one person, you can remember it, but 4 people, I didn't have any faith that I was going to remember all about 4 people. So, well, never mind. We'll wing it. We'll wing it. This is the story of Jesse Hartwell. Jesse was born in Bedford, Mass, about 1750. And when he was born, he was already enslaved. His enslaver was Joseph Fitch. And Joseph Fitch, when, let's see, let me tell you that at first Jesse's name was Jeremiah. No, at first Jesse's name was Jeffrey. And he changed his name toward the end where the story gets better and better. So now I'll call him Jeffrey, but toward the end he gets to be Jesse instead. Jeffrey was sold, and the Bedford Historical Society has the bill of sale. This is very sad and upsetting at the beginning. It gets better as the story goes on. But the bill of sale is a whole page, but it says in short, I, Joseph Fitch of Bedford, for the sum of £25, paid it before the sealing of a delivery, the receipt I do hereby acknowledge, have bargained and sold unto Joseph Hartwell, a Negro boy about 5 years old, called Jeffrey. Now, Jeffrey, sorry, I'm messing around with this. Oh, I don't know much about Jeffrey and his young life, but I do know about his enslaver, Joseph Hartwell. He lived by Hartwell Hill, logically, and his house is gone now. It's under a runway at Hanscom Field. He was wealthy. He was respected. He was a selectman for a while. He was the moderator, and he was a member of the militia. Here we go again. Those alarm riders are coming. Get up, get up. The regulars are out. This time they went by Hartwell's house. If you want to know, I think they came from Lincoln and came over. A lot of the town was alerted by the Lexington riders. Somebody from Lincoln came over for the other part. So they were woken 2 to 3 in the morning, and Joseph Hartwell went to Captain John Moore's house as quickly as he could. John Moore lived on the Concord Road, so it wouldn't have been far to go from Hartwell Hill. 50 militiamen were massing at Captain John Moore's house, and 27 more were at the Fitch Tavern up in the center of town. They were all white. Their names are recorded and their pay. How do I know this? There's a wonderful book. There's a wonderful set of books that's about 24 volumes long called Soldiers and Sailors of the American Revolution. And you can look people up and it will say they were there from 1729 to 1733 at Saratoga. And then they were at, it gives their exact record, their exact service record. So Jeffrey's service record doesn't start until 1777. All these 17 numbers are getting me. And I wonder if it's because he was Black and you didn't pay servants, you didn't pay slaves. Their money went into the enslaver's pocket. Well, this happened to Jeffrey. He was sent to Bunker Hill, fought at Bunker Hill, came home, and Joseph Hartwell took the money. Frances, his Jeffrey's daughter, told the story years later, and she doesn't mention Concord, but she says he went to Bunker Hill, and when he came back and his owner took the money, he was furious, and he turned around and he went back into the army, and he stayed for several years until he got out, which was not at the end of the war. He got out in about 1779. There are, in the old burying ground in Bedford, there is a marker that says Cambridge Moore, Caesar Jones, Caesar Prescott, Negro slaves in the Revolution, And that's the people that we know of, or when they put the marker up in around 1900 that we knew of. Jeffrey. Why didn't Jeffrey get on the marker? It's because he didn't die in Bedford. He died in Dracut. There was a town, a community of free African Americans who lived in Dracut, and their community was called Black North. It was active during the American Revolution through the 1800s, and was very important in the Underground Railroad back further in time. So Jeffrey left the army. He hadn't run away. The Hartwells knew perfectly well where he was. He's been hired on by J.B. Varnum, Captain J.V. Varnum, who hired him on as a farmhand. After Jeffrey was there a bit, he changed his name, as I mentioned before, to Jesse. And sometimes he called himself Jesse Hartwell, and sometimes he called himself Jesse Freeman. So there he met Maria, I think her name was Maria Brill, and they married. And as a wedding gift, Captain Varnum gave Maria 2 acres of land for her to build a house and have a farm plot on. I love that. Let's see. I was going to say that, he wasn't a runaway slave. When he left the army, he was probably free because Hartwell went over to Captain Varnum's house and they discussed Jesse's freedom, and it came out well because Jesse stayed in Black North and married Maria. But all of the slaves in Massachusetts were technically free. With the Massachusetts Constitution, all men are born free and equal and have certain natural, essential, and unalienable rights, among which may be reckoned the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberties. That was the Massachusetts Constitution. Actually, almost all of the slaves, the enslaved people, were free before that. And I have to tell you, that's about it. Maria and Jesse had 6 children. They lived in that house and the 2 acres, and then their children lived in that house after their deaths. And if you want to see their graves, you go to Hamlet Cemetery in Lowell, where their graves are with their names on them. And that's the story of Jesse Hartwell. Questions? Oh, Poor Mrs. Pennington, another book. Why would Hartwell have given the land to Maria and not to Jesse? Well, it was Varnum that gave the land, and Maria had been his servant for years and years and years. And Jesse just kind of turned up maybe a few months, a year later. So it was to Maria that Varnum gave the land. Do you know about how many slaves there were in Bedford about that time? I don't know. It's very difficult to know unless they turn up in the town records. You had to put down a deposit, if you freed a slave so that that person would not become a burden on the town and have to be supported. And I've seen one or two of those. Sometimes they crop up. I found about 30 in the whole of the 1700s, 30 enslaved people in the 1700s. Slaves were sometimes listed in assessor's records. I've seen some of that in Lexington records. Whoo, that would be good. Ooh, I'll go look, Lee. Oh, not listed by name though. I've seen in census servants for life and marked, and it's hard to know whether they are enslaved for life or servants for life. Hard to know. Anybody else have a question? Nope. Well, I have another one. Wait a minute. Ah, thank you. I have another character.
Sharon, there was one other question I note.
Yeah.
It says from Lee Vorder, says it's possible that Jesse's name changed because of the way S was written and looked like an F, question mark?
Yes. There was a rule about how an F and S gets substituted. And I think it's a double S gets to be an F. So it's Massachusetts. I don't know, Lee. Oh, here's my other Lee. 2 S's. You make the second one elongated like an F. Thank you.
Here's one other question here I see, Sharon. It says, how were the slaves treated in the military? Were they a regular fighter or something different? That's from Thomas McDonald.
I don't know.
That's all the chat I see.
Okay, no more chatting. Oh, this one is fun. This program, everybody in it, their name begins with J. Have you noticed that? Everybody's Joseph Hartwell, Joseph Fitch, Jesse. I got another J for you, Jeremiah. But this is Jeremiah Blood, Blood. Yes, indeed, that's his name. Now let me see. Here it is, Jeremiah Blood. Don't want to miss anything. This is a good story. All right. On New Year's Eve, I got a Bedford historian question through Facebook from a woman out in Michigan named Kelly. Kelly, you on? Hello. Kelly said, did Jeremiah Blood buy a pew in the church, in the meeting house in 1789? Oh my. Well, I'll start with Jeremiah Blood and we'll work up from there. So I pulled out A.E. Brown. I've got it right here, but it doesn't help to show it to you. A.E. Brown, and looked, index all over the place. History of Bedford. A.E. Brown is History of Bedford. And he was listed in one roster of soldiers. That was all. So I thought, well, A. Brown doesn't know him. He must have been a minor character. He must not have done much. But I kept looking. And I played around in Ancestry.com, which I subscribe to. It's not one of the perks of the town historian job, but I do. And there were several Jeremiah Bloods in Missouri and Wisconsin, yeah, Massachusetts, but no really details. No details. I thought, again, nothing. So I looked in Revolutionary Town. That's the book that Louise K. Brown wrote back in the, I want to say, early 70s. And it's fabulous if you're studying the Revolutionary War in Bedford, because it lists every soldier who was in the war and tells you all about them. So I looked in there. Bob's your uncle. There was Jeremiah Blood and his son Isaiah. They had been in the Revolution. He and his oldest son both. He had been at the Concord Bridge, but nothing more. And Isaiah had not been at the Concord Bridge, but a little bit more. So this is great. I went back to Kelly and I told her, well, they were both in the Revolution. Kelly said, I knew that. But she'd been studying her family for years and she knew just everything. So she sent me a citation to a newspaper. And I also subscribed to newspapers.com. So I just looked it right up and there it was. Boston, April 22nd, 1790. A gang of thieves near 30 in number, which has for a long time infested, that's your S's and F's, infested Middlesex County, has lately been broken up. 13 of them belonging to one family were tried last week at Concord. I thought, whoa. This family that Kelly is looking for, this family that is from Bedford, is a gang of thieves? This is cool. How could A.E. Brown, how could Louise K. Brown not know this? So I looked, how could I have forgotten? In Ina Manser. Ina Manser is quite dependable. You know, Lee Yates has edited the Ina Manser Reader. I looked in that and I wasn't surprised it wasn't there because she wouldn't have written a whole chapter about her. But I happen to have a recent acquisition, Ina Manser's 1,000-page biographical encyclopedia, which she wrote like a life's work. Every time she encountered a person in the town records or anywhere else, she made a card like a little bit bigger than this card. And there are more than 1,000 of these cards, these people. And the Bedford Library owns the original. And for years I've been saying, oh, wow, I would do anything for a copy of this. This would help me so much. So finally I thought, all right, I'll ask. And I asked Richard Callaghan, who's the director, is it possible for me to Xerox it? He said, sure, if you want to. The original one had been Xerox so that they were in pages. So I didn't have to do the index cards. So I got all those 1,000 pages indexed. Oh, I digress. Ina said she knew that he sold a pew in 1789. Well, here's the pew that Kelly wanted. We figured out together, Kelly and I, that he'd bought a pew from two ladies, probably bought low, and sold the pew high. He'd flipped the pew. So let me see. Now the questioner, that's Kelly, became the answerer. That's Kelly too. She had found an article in the Massachusetts Legal History Journal. Massachusetts Legal History Journal. It's in the 2000s. It's in the last 20 years. And it said, I won't read you the whole thing because it's 3 pages, but it said that poor Jeremiah was indicted guilty on 20 counts of robbery. He was the ringleader, but 5 of his sons and his 18-year-old daughter, Hannah, his brother Ezra, 2 of his daughters, his son, and his wife. There were 13 of them, all going around 2 by 2, 3 by 3, breaking into different houses. Here you go. Here's some of the things that they stole. Not gold and jewels. Nope, nope, nope. 8 sheepskins from a shop in Billerica, 2 pairs of trousers and 2 shirts from a Littleton house, 2 bushels of rye from a corn mill in Stowe, a leather and calfskin pile from a shop in Acton, and is my favorite, from a shop in Framingham, 7 shoes. And from a barn in Bedford, 2 bushels of Indian corn. And also he stole from his wife Sarah's relatives. You're going to love this. It's Joseph Hartwell, our Joseph Hartwell again. And took him to trial, and Jeremiah's house and land. So when Jeremiah came back from jail, he would have nothing. The sentence was very hard. 5 of the men and 3 of the women were sentenced to do time. The 5 men were sentenced to Castle Island in Boston Harbor, and the 3 women were kept in the Concord jail for a year. On Castle Island, you made nails, made iron nails, made hundreds of nails, thousands of nails, millions of nails. Jeremiah had a 7-year sentence, but he only lasted 2 years and then he died. His son Daniel was released for ill health, went home and died 2 weeks later. Jeremiah Jr. served his term, went out, started robbing again, was caught, sent back to Castle Island, and died. But no gravestones for these outlaws. Let me see. So the century ended, and the family that was left picked up their lives and went on. But 3 of the boys left Massachusetts. Israel, the oldest, and Solomon, the youngest, went to Western New York. And Francis changed his name to Hartwell and went to Canada, where their grim pasts couldn't follow them. Now, generations, their 5th great-granddaughter, Kelly, began to look back. But here, my story ends. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Oh, hey, this is good. I'd like to talk to you about my ancestors. Ooh, excellent, excellent. Might be best. Oh, excellent, excellent. It says privately, it's just me. And Billa, there's some more I can't read anymore. No? I want to know if Kelly's on. You make a little squeak or something?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, is that you, Kelly?
It is, yes.
Hey, how nice to see you.
Yes. Well,
I have been seeing you on Facebook.
Yes, I do want to say a big thank you. I will tell everyone here that when I reached out to Sharon, it was because of her book about the church that I found her on Google. And I reached out on, was it New Year's Eve?
Mhm.
And she was so excited by this mystery of who is this Jeremiah Blood that she and I were frantically messaging back and forth for hours on New Year's Eve. And at one point she said, I have to go ring the bell. I'll be right back. It was such a wonderful resource, and she's been super helpful confirming what I've found already and putting some puzzle pieces together. I will ask, do you think that do you think that Joseph Hartwell from our story is the same Joseph Hartwell that owned Jesse?
I do.
Really? Interesting.
Mhm.
Love that connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more? Oh, yes. Such a funny group of thieves. Oh, and that's. Oh, could you explain a little bit about the buying and selling of pews? Well, they didn't take a collection every week, and you didn't pledge every year. You bought a pew, and it costs a lot of money to buy a pew. And pews were a status symbol, and they were also more comfortable by a window, away from a door. If you wanted to hear really well up front, if you wanted to sleep and think you could avoid the tithing man, sit in the back. So there would be a pew that was yours, and there were box pews that you would sit 6, 7, 8 people in, some of them with their backs to the minister, and you could actually will your pew to someone else. That's what I know.
Sharon, Lee Yates says that pews were bought and sold as real estate.
Well, how are we doing for time? We have time for one more, or had I better?
Yes, no, please.
You can sneak off if you have somewhere else to go, and I'll never know. It'll be all right. Well, the fourth character. Notes. Hey. Well, the fourth character is Miriam Fitch. This is a story that was written in the diary of John Boyle, who kept a diary, a journal of things that were happening in Boston during the 1700s. And this was reprinted in the New England Historic Genealogical Register in 1930. Her name was Miriam Fitch. She lived in Bedford in the 1700s and was married to the miller. Their house was up on Old Billrica Road. And I'm sure she took good care of her 11 children, kept house and garden, cooked and washed and ironed, made candles and soap, dyed cloth and sewed it into clothing. But evidently the life of a colonial woman was not fulfilling. And one day in 1762, she mounted her horse and set off to Boston on a most selfish errand. Well, she went to the home of a well-known Boston merchant, Mr. Christopher Clark. I know where there's a chest of money, she said. And if you'll give me 1,500 Johannes, I'll show you where it is. Well, you're going to ask me what a Johannes is, and I can tell you it's a gold coin. And I have no idea what it's worth. I've seen, I'll look it up, and I've seen that it's worth 36 shillings, and I've seen that it's worth $5, and I've seen that it's worth $20. So we'll just say gold coins, Johannes are gold coins. Well, 15 Hannes gold coins is a lot, but if this were a treasure, a chest full of treasure, 1,500 Johannes would be worth it. So he said to Miriam, sure, I'll get it for you. But he didn't happen to have 1,500 gold pieces on hand. So he went to his neighbor, Nathaniel Wheelwright, and said, I got a good deal for you. You want to buy in on this? And he said, sure, I will. So he brought some gold, some silver. And Miriam Fitch said, well, this is too heavy for me, silver and gold pieces. I want it all in gold pieces. Well, neither Wheelwright nor Christopher Clark had that much money on hand. So they went to another merchant and said, do you happen to have? And he said, yes, I do. And they said, we'll cut you in. And he said, great. So he brought over all the Johannes, the golden Johannes, gave it to Miriam. And Miriam led the men on horseback as fast as they could ride out to Bedford to the mill and met her accomplice by the mill. His name was Samuel Bacon. And she said, now here's the trap door. I'll open the trap door in the cellar of the mill and you go down and hand the chest up and Mr. Bacon will help you with the chest. Now, would you go down that trap door? Would you? These guys were so gullible that they went down the trap door and Miriam slammed the trap door on top of them and locked them in. Then she went off with the 1,200 Johannes, and it was a mill. They were going to open the floodgates and the men would have been drowned, but they were yelling. And a man passing by heard them and let them out. Well, Miriam and Samuel were caught, of course, and taken to Cambridge and tried in the Supreme Court and were found guilty of being notorious cheats. And they were sentenced to be in the stocks for an hour, which doesn't sound like much, but it was January, with a paper pinned on their chest that said, cheat. They had to stay 3 months in jail and be on probation for a year and pay all the costs. And you would think she learned her lesson, that Miriam. But 2 or 3 years later, in the Boston Gazette and Country Journal, there was an advertisement that said, for Alice Whitmore or her heirs, please contact Miriam Fitch. I have something that might be of interest to you. Well, one of the stories that's the most fun to tell is The Legend of the Witch of the Shawsheen, published in 1892 in Abram English Brown. Here he is again, but he has just a little book called Glimpses of Old New England Life, Legends of Old Bedford. And here he has legends and stories that have been passed down. This one passed down in the Fitch and Hartwell families. Here are your Fitches and Hartwells again. And with it had come an ancient red cloak, which is in the archives of the Bedford Historical Society. And I knew better than to ask to bring it out of the archives, but here it is. It's like this, and it goes down, and it's snazzy. But red cloak or not, the cloak exists, but the tale, a story is about a woman named Miriam who grew up in Andover and fell in love with Benjamin Fitch, and he brought her upriver in his canoe to live at the house near the mill. But her life was an unhappy one. The people in Bedford ostracized her because of that red cloak. It was too gaudy, too ostentatious. And she had a hat with brilliant red plumes that came out of her hat. And the people in Bedford said, oh no, this is terrible. She's an awful person. And they ostracized her. And she had no friends until the town was struck by a throat distemper, and the children caught the throat distemper. I think it's diphtheria, but it might be strep throat. And Miriam went from child to child, house to house, with tansy tea and healed the children. And now the people loved her as they shouted out with glee, Miriam, the red-nosed reindeer. No, that's not right. She's remembered as being very patriotic. During the years before the war, she was the one who was spinning and weaving her own cloth. She was the one who was drinking herb tea. And one day she decided that she could go into Boston and trick 3 Tory officers. So she went into Boston. She found 3 English, British, well, they're all British, but regular generals. And she said, you know, I know, you've heard this part before, I know where there's a treasure. You want to come with me? Well, they thought that it was the key to the storehouse where the colonials hid their gunpowder and stuff like that. So they said, yeah, we'll come. And they went out to Bedford, out to the mill, and she lit a candle and led them across a plank bridge across the Shawsheen. And when they got to the other side, she blew out the candle, crossed back over the bridge, picked up the planks, and stranded them in a cavern on the other side of the Shawsheen. And as she left, she took the money out of the men's saddlebags and she used it to help wounded soldiers. Now this is the Miriam Fitch switch, which was really the witch. Have you questions? Oh, more. I'm a descendant of the Fitches. Hey, Hal, this is great. This is back from the pews. There are deeds out there to pews. That is neat. That's from Lee Yates. Lee says, more. Chris Fitch White to everyone. My grandmother, ouch. From Lee again. Well, AEB does call it Legends of Old England. It is Legends of Old New England. It's legends. And you can pick them apart if you want to, but I just thought I'd retell them and not pick them apart. And in the house, you refer to the one we call the Shawsheen house on the corner of Shawsheen and Page. No. The Benjamin Fitch was the miller, and the Bacons lived in the Bacon house, which is up Old Billrica Road. Lee, where did the Benjamin Fitch live? Did he live closer down to the mill? Lee? I don't know. If Fitch lived in the Bacon house, I don't think he did. I think he had his own house. Yep, here's Lee. I don't know, but I assume he lived near the mill. Me too. I think he lived near the mill, like over near where Carlton Willard is, in that area. Anybody? Bill, you see anybody else? Nope.
People don't have to write a chat. They can just unmute themselves and ask a question of Sharon.
someone in my family got some of the Bacon Mill. So some of the Fitches got the Bacon Mill. I don't know which one. I have my little Bedford history here. I need to check in. But I know there was somebody that inherited part of the Bacon Mill. I don't know if it was Benjamin or not. Okay, it says Benjamin, son of Samuel, bought the Bacon Mill on the Shawsheen. And, so that's all I have. So,
And you're a Fitch.
yes, I am a Fitch.
Neat.
I got to see the cloak when I was doing my DAR papers some years ago. It had been donated, and a gentleman, and I'm not sure, I'm sorry, I apologize, someone said, "Oh wow, want to see something?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that was great." So,
That's neat. Well, if you want to see a picture of it, it's in my Bedford History for Kids.
oh,
I don't know what page, but it is.
I just finished listening to, well, it's an old podcast. It's by Aaron Mackey, and he does Unobscured, and it talks about the Salem witch trials. But in a portion of that, it also talks about how some people in Andover spoke out about being possessed or having witches in Andover. And where Miriam was from Andover, I'm just wondering if something, I don't know much about her family in Andover, but
She was Miriam Gray.
right.
And her mother was a Lovejoy. And the Salem witch trials were in 1692, and Andover in there too. And that would have made Miss Lovejoy 4 years old.
Okay. Yeah.
The A.E. Brown's legend says that it was Martha Carrier that she was testifying against. And I've looked up Martha Carrier, and I haven't found any 4-year-olds testing against her. But
I was just curious. I was just curious where they gave it the Witch of the Shawsheen, the name, the witch, if it had anything to do with her background in Andover.
Yeah.
That's a great, if anyone wants to listen to it, it's a podcast, and it's a bunch of different stories about the whole trials. And then at the end of it is an interview with the different people that contributed to it, like Emerson Baker, who is a professor at Salem State University, and someone from Cornell. And there's a bunch of people, but you want to know, I'll send you information. But it's really interesting.
I know there's a Lovejoy Road in Andover because I grew up in Andover, and I know there's a Lovejoy Road. When I heard you mention that.
Sharon, I have a question. Is it possible that we are dealing with two different women and their stories have been, conglomerated into one story?
Perhaps. And A.E. Brown just used the name Miriam Fitch and Benjamin Fitch. But they're both identified by name. One in the, I want to go and look up in the archives the actual record of the crime, and I haven't yet. But I'm convinced myself. I don't know.
Sharon, can I say something? Hi, everybody. My name is Deb Pierce. I'm from Newton, and my cousins and I have been going through our family history. I may be related to some of you. We may have stories that are similar, but I'm eager to find out more and think this might be a good place to start. My grandpa was Louis E. Pierce, lived at 22 Weber Ave, and his father built that house the year before he was born, which I think is 1880 or so. I've got all of the dates. I'm not at my fingertips. He lived there with his sister and his His brother-in-law was Sam Loomis. Loomis Street is right next to Weber. Grandpa's family, Weber was one of the people in Grandpa's family. His sister married Herbert Clark, living on Davis Road. The relatives go back, the Gleasons, the Davises,
Oh, they
the
do,
Putnams.
yeah.
All of those people are my relatives, and I have pictures of all of them. And I'm trying to fill in to make a book for all of the family about them. And I don't know kind of where to find answers to some of the questions I have. I've got a family tree that goes back something like six or eight generations, starting from my grandfather, goes back to Israel Putnam. And so could we do a program about this, or shall I talk to you offline? Does anybody here know any of these names, or do you live on the streets? Do you have stories about these family members?
We know the streets, Weber Avenue, yes, indeed. And Herbert Clark over on Davis. Yep.
He was my uncle, my great uncle.
Ah. And Israel Putnam, not the same Israel Putnam that was in Connecticut, and he was a general.
Yeah,
This is
I think it was the same one. I mean, he was a relative. We're descended from him. I've got this family tree that I've been able to create. He married Hannah Pope in 1739. Their daughter was Mary Molly Putnam. She go by Mary or Molly. She married Samuel Waldo. Their daughter or granddaughter was Mary Waldo. She married William Weber. They had a daughter, Sarah Weber, who married Henry Gleason. That was my grandfather's grandparents.
Oh, you've done a lot already. I'd love to work with you if you wanna.
Yeah.
If you wanna get to me,
I would.
So I'm talking from Idaho, and I'm Deb's cousin. And you keep talking about
roof trees.
And I found this book in a banquet when I was working as a teenager for 10 cents on the library table for throwaways. But what Deb's talking about is on page 207. That's our grandfather, Lewis Edward Pierce, and his sister Bertha. And so we're doing Deb's spearheading a lot of family delving into this history. But I'm here in Idaho, and I do meet every month. This is fascinating. Deb's the one who gave me the link. That's it. Lewis Edward is our grandpa. And number 11 looks just like a picture of Deb's sister when she was little. I showed it to the family once, and they said, "Oh, that's Sherry." So this is fascinating. I love the way you told the stories. So do you meet every month to come in on Zoom? I would love to follow you.
We have a program almost every month during the year, and I'm honored to do a program maybe once a year. But I'd love to talk to you.
Great.
How do they find me, Carol? Do you have a pencil?
I reached out to the Bedford Historical Society and said that I'm looking for information about the family and would love to talk to somebody. And then I got this introduction to today's session. I see Karen going like this. Karen Friedrich, do you want to add something to this?
Karen, you have to unmute yourself.
I'm so delighted to see the connections going on here. And certainly you got to join the Bedford Historical Society. And then you'll be in the circuit and you'll get all that information. And working with Sharon is certainly the wonderful place to start, Sharon, if you're willing to go this way. I'm just excitement, delight.
Yes. I want to go out to the, what's the best way to find out where everybody's buried?
I have If it's the old burying ground, which is before 1850, there's a wonderful study of all the graves by number, all the graves alphabetically, all the just it's amazing. So when I find your letter, I wonder if it's already your email, if it's already at the Historical Society. I go in once a week, so I'll look for it.
Sharon, if you want to send a note to me with your contact information, then perhaps we can, or I'll send you mine and we can talk offline.
Yeah.
And Raymond was just talking, we're cousins.
Maybe
Right.
you could talk with Sharon after the meeting, because this needs
Right.
to be more
I'm gonna
private.
go.
Yeah.
Also
I'm
mention
gonna
your
go
Facebook
off.
page. You also have a wonderful Facebook page.
The Historical Society or Miss
Historical
Pierce?
Society.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed the contributions that are in there each week. It's been wonderful.
Oh,
and it also gives information on some of the activities that you're talking about right now.
Do we have more to say about Sharon's talk?
I was wondering if the name of the podcast could be repeated. That was mentioned by, the middle name was Fitch. Yeah, it's Aaron Makey, ARRONMAHKE, and it's called Unobscured. And the podcast that I watched was several years ago, but he did one on lore, and I think he did on spiritualism. I'm not sure what season he's in, but I listened to it on the way to school. I teach, so on the way to school, I listened to it and I re-listened to it. My son says, "Haven't you finished it yet?" I said, "Well, I'm listening to it again." Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. And I also want to mention that my interest in being part of this group, I live in South Carolina. I grew up in Bedford until I was 14. And when I started doing my family genealogy, I found out that part of our family actually lived in Bedford back in the late 1700s. It was the Maxwell family and the Wilsons. So and of course I recognize all the names y'all are mentioning, like the Fitches and Loomis and all that, from having lived there, until I was 14. And I was part of the Unitarian Church, which is the one on the Common that you talk about all the time. So I just have such a pleasure hearing the stories and getting to see these faces now too, getting to meet people. So thank you for doing this. This has been wonderful. And I live in Georgia.
Thank you for joining us.
It would be wonderful if those of you who do have connections to Bedford, who are from out of town, would send an email to the Bedford Historical Society so we can keep track of you and track you all down and connect with you. Thank you.
I am absolutely delighted with the geographic extent and the family extent of the contributors and commentators for this meeting. It's just incredible. And maybe this whole business of having to go to Zoom meetings was not so bad after all. Maybe we have put together a whole lot of connections here that would never have happened with the meetings we used to have in the congregational church or the First Parish meeting hall or something like that. This is absolutely wonderful. It sounds to me like we are getting fairly close to the end of this meeting itself. Does anybody have any last words they'd really like to add to the discussion? Of course. Bravo, thanks for the story from Kelly Craven to everyone. Bravo, Sharon, thanks for the story.
Yes, ditto. Thank you, Sharon. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thanks to all of you, because you've really made this a wonderful meeting. And thanks to Sharon for getting it all going. Carol, are we pretty well done at this point with this meeting, do you think?
Yes, I do. And I want to thank everyone for participating again. Thanks our president, Tom Kinzer, for his introduction. And of course, thank Sharon for all of her excellent research and wonderful stories. And we look forward, Sharon, to having you again. So I am going to stop the recording and say goodbye to everyone at this point.
Okay.
Okay.